Welcome back. Now, the South African Police Service confronts the depth of crisis within its law enforcement, with over 5 million cases closed due to a lack of leads, raising concerns about the effectiveness of the force and the pursuit of justice for society. Joining me now to delve into the implications of this alarming statistic and what it means for the nation's safety and security is features and cover editor for the Financial Mail, Shirley de Villiers. Shirley, an absolute pleasure. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Shirley, when we speak of a crisis, we're not actually using that word loosely. Just speak to us about some of the stats that you quote in this article that really, amplify the fact that we are in a crisis here.
Well, I mean, starting with the stat of the 5.4 million dockets that are closed unresolved, I mean, that just sounds astounding. As the DA pointed out, that's 3,000 dockets a day where the victims don't get justice for crimes that have been committed against them. So what you can look at, I mean, it speaks to a police service that isn't able to investigate, and it suggests that there's a problem where crime is outweighing our ability to manage it, which again has its own knock-on problems in terms of criminals feeling impunity, emboldened, and being able to continue committing crimes because they don't feel that they're being punished for them. But if you take a look at the detective rate, for example, or the detection rate, that's essentially the number of cases that are referred for trial, they're withdrawn, or they're found to be unfounded. And so those stats could be an indicator of, the health of the police force, arguably. So, for example, if you look at the murder rate, there's a detection rate of 12.5%. That means that, 87% of cases go unresolved. If you look at aggravated robbery, you're looking at 14.7%. So there you're looking at, 85% that go unresolved. And those figures filter down into other levels as well. If you're looking at residential burglary, it's 17%. If you're looking at business burglary, 20%. If your car gets stolen or your bike gets stolen, you're looking at a detection rate of about 7%. So it's relatively dire on that level. There are a couple of places, of the 18 categories I looked at, there were 5 where you actually have a detection rate above 50%. And quite hearteningly, one of those is sexual violence. And that's jumped dramatically since 2018, 2019, when it was somewhere around 25%, and it's now 60%. So it does suggest that there are areas where specific interventions, like against gender-based violence, might be paying off.
A big issue here that then emerges is just the trust of communities here. And like you mentioned, emboldened criminals, Shirley, we do know that, just the threat of justice is enough to deter a criminal from actually going to commit a crime. But with these very low stats and with criminals being often organized in networks, when they realize that the chance of them getting caught or convicted are low, we're bound to see more aggressive, more brazen, and more emboldened criminals.
Absolutely, but it also speaks to communities themselves. When we take a look at the detection rate as potentially being indicative of the health of the force, this is something that the ISS's Gareth Newham wrote about. And it comes down to 3 things. If you're looking at a healthy police force, you need to have a relationship with communities. You need to have a relationship of trust in order to gather information and evidence. In addition to that, you need to have working crime intelligence. And so you could arguably say that there's a problem with crime intelligence if you have these terribly poor detection rates. And then also it's about first responders being adequately trained, and that is your boots on the ground, and making sure that if they're there, they can be vital in securing witnesses, securing evidence. And all of that contributes to a healthy force.
There's also the issue of the number of detectives here. Shall you help us understand that? Because, of course, with these stats comes something that must be systematically wrong within the force. And I'm wondering if that speaks to money, funding of these detectives.
It's not funding per se that is a problem. Bear in mind that the police budget has increased from, I think in 2012, it was something like 56 billion, and it's now 102 billion. So there's been a dramatic increase in funding, but at the same time, it's about the efficient use of that funding. But if you look at detectives, for example, there's also been attrition within detectives' ranks. So but from 2016, 2017 until 2023, I think you lost something like 8,400 detectives. Between March 2022 and March 2023, you went down from 19,000 to 17,500. So there has been attrition within detectives' ranks. They've been lured by the private sector, and that speaks to a problem of numbers, but it's also a problem of poorly used resources.
Talking about resources, in the article you also mentioned that in some areas the police force is just bloated, and I think that's the places where the salaries are really high.
Yeah, so you sit with a situation where you have this incredibly top-heavy service, and this is something that the analysts have written about. So I think the stats are something like you've got 200 generals, you've got more than 600 brigadiers, and they're sucking up something like 1 billion rand of the budget. And that, at current rates, is 5% of the detectives' budget. So, you know, you see a mismatch there between where we actually need resources. You have a further problem that under a bargaining sector council agreement, it's automatic for the non-commissioned officers to be promoted every 4 years. So in 2018-2019, you had 42,000 promotions. And that obviously, again, has a knock-on effect in terms of the money available to pay salaries.
Another interesting one, Shirley, before I let you go here, is we keep speaking or keep hearing of the fact that we're training new policemen, we're training all kinds of security forces. We've got boots on the ground, we've got them out in communities. We know that that's not quite, having the required or intended impact on crime. Do we know what we're getting wrong in that regard?
Well, I think a large part of it, and I'm no expert on the police here, but I think a large part of it is training, and it's about the correct allocation of resources. So, for example, now there's going to be a new intake of 10,000 recruits. There is talk that some of those will be dedicated towards a detective unit, which is necessary. But, you know, you sit with a position, for example, after the July 2021 riots, and David Bruce writes about this, where there was suddenly a push to have more public order policing. But there was actually a mismatch if you take a look at the statistics at the time. Outside of that anomaly of July 2021, you were sitting with you were sitting with very few unrest incidents back to 2015, 2016 levels. So essentially the push for having more boots on the ground shouldn't have been for public order policing. It should have actually looked at going elsewhere.
Does look like there's lots of work to be done here. Stuff to keep in mind as we head into an election, Shirley. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. That was Features and Covers Editor for the Financial Mail, Shirley de Villiers.